Reborn. Evolving from Nothing Chapters 51 to 60. Chapter 51. Arrival. When Dorian combined bloodlines that he'd already fully grown, he would automatically start at the most complete growth stage, as far as he was aware. It would cost him some amount of energy to fuse the bloodlines, but apart from that, he didn't need time for his soul to adapt. He was ready to go instantly. Dorian's body began to shift, transforming from the lesser life wolf form. His fur changed for slim, gleaming scales colored a faded green shade. His body shifted and expanded, turning into a bipedal, vaguely humanoid creature. His face became one that was vaguely draconic, with two small horns sticking out of his head. A sharp set of small spikes moved up and down his spine, protruding slightly. Thick, but dense, muscles bulged in his arms, giving him a powerful appearance. His wolf paws transformed into scaled hands, ending in short, pointed claws. Ah! Dorian breathed out, his scaled face flush. Lesser Throne Demon. Growth Stage, 4 quarters, Throne Elder. Growth Progress 45,602/0. He'd used up about 3,000 growth energy points to merge the bloodlines for this form. He paused for a moment, bringing up his status. Dorian. Soul Status. Soul Stage. Grandmaster Class. Pseudo-Lord. Health. Perfect. Energy. 2,945 2,945. He glanced over it, nodding in satisfaction. His soul had grown stronger yet again. As he did so, a mental notification popped up inside his mind. New ability gained. Ability. Demonic Eyes, 2 halves. Description. A passive ability unique to members of the demonic race. Demons have the ability to see through illusions and to see when there is little or no light. In addition, members of the demon race have enhanced vision that allows them to see great distances, and have increased visual acuity. This ability grows in mastery. Oh, he said aloud as he finished reading over the ability. He tested it, staring at his scaled hand. He moved his hand from side to side, at a fast speed. Every single movement his hand made was in perfect detail in his eyes, unable to escape his vision. Fascinating. As he was looking this over, Asra spoke up in Dorian's mind. Certain abilities will sometimes have unique interactions in certain forms. In your Lesser Throne Demon form, the Condense ability does not function like it normally does. Asra gave him a warning. Dorian listened, waiting. Asra didn't say anything else. He rolled his eyes, and he mentally commanded her to explain. Lesser Throne Demons have the ability to give off a life aura. It is similar to the aura a Lord class being can give off, except instead of an aura created through the laws of the universe, it is an aura formed from the latent life energy in a Lesser Throne Demon. It has no offensive capabilities, and will feel slightly off when compared to actual Lord class auras. Dorian listened to what she said and then turned his focus inward. Over the past several weeks, Dorian had gained an almost complete control and awareness of every aspect of his body as he switched forms. As he focused on his body, he could feel a powerful energy flowing through the veins of his current form. Full of furious, powerful vibrancy, painting an image of colorful explosive light in his mind. It was very similar to the life elemental energy he had absorbed from before, but this time it was completely under his control. He felt as if he could move this energy anywhere within his body, combining it with his constant regeneration for a powerful effect. I see, he began, practicing moving the energy in his body around. So what happens if I condense it? The life energy in your body will start to combust at an extremely fast rate. At the same time, it will temporarily boost your physical strength, perception of time, and durability by very large amounts. Oh, I like the sound of that. So it's like my regular condense, but an upgraded version of it that only works if I have life energy flowing through my body. What is the downside? He queried. The life energy of a normal Lesser Throne Demon is not unlimited. Condensing burns that life energy up and puts an enormous strain on the body, badly damaging the genetic makeup of the demon. This normally takes weeks or even months to repair, even with their powerful regenerative capabilities. Asra began. However, with your unique soul spell matrix, genetic damage is easily repairable as long as you switch forms. Most of the normal damage and injuries you take will remain consistent through transformations, due to the unavoidable laws of the universe. Asra continued, your soul spell matrix can nullify any genetic damage, allowing you to sidestep this downside, though it will cost some amount of energy points. Not bad, he could deal with that. He began to walk around his room, getting used to his new form. He stood just under 2 meters tall, not an intimidating size at all. His entire body was covered with small grayish-green scales, sleek and gleaming. He put on a set of loose black pants and a gray shirt, figuring he'd blend in more if he wore clothes. He could speak like normal. He felt at the 2 small horns on his head and then shrugged. He hadn't met anyone that was a member of the demon race, he hadn't even heard or read anything about them. However, with how many races existed that he'd seen so far, he figured he wouldn't stand out too much. He didn't look too different from some of the lizard men he'd seen in the city. He was probably fine, he thought, nodding his head as he went over his new form. He was glad he'd picked the virulent wolf, and gained so much from its subsequent transformations. His second choice, the fire imp, would have been a powerful aid, but how could it compare to his lesser throne demon evolution? Sure, fire imps were extremely resistant to heat and other aspects of fire or flame magic, but what were the odds that he would have immediately been able to put that form to good use right after picking it? It could wait a day. Just as he was thinking this, a rumbling explosion shook the air, very far from Dorian. Boom! A huge shockwave blew open his wooden shutters, almost stunning him as he turned around. He leaned his body to the left, watching the wooden shutters fly past him. He jumped up to the window, looking out up at the sky. Around half a dozen miles from the city wall, a vast ball of fire could be seen, expanding in a gargantuan explosion that was at least 2 miles wide. Brilliant orange light emerged from this blast, violent gusts of wind slamming into the city. Bright beams of fire seemed to shoot straight up into the air from the meteor of flame, giving off an even more brilliant light. Oh my God, it's the end of the world. Run! In the background, the screams and yells of people in the street echoed as panic set in. Pedestrians rushed into each other as they fled in the direction opposite the explosion, merchants abandoning their wares, wizards casting spells to protect themselves or aid them in fleeing. Dorian, meanwhile, just stared at the deadly meteor, the biggest he had ever seen in his life. What the? Before he could finish the thought, a painfully loud voice echoed across the city, a fierce, mighty yell. My dear brother, I have come to greet you. Please come out, lest I burn this city anew. Damn! Helena, a powerful vampire sent by High Lord Marcus to track down Dorian, stared up at the massive fireball that had appeared to the west of the city, biting her bottom lip. She winced as she heard several harsh, draconic syllables shake through the air, indecipherable unless one spoke draconic. She had been pacing back and forth on the western city wall, waiting for her comrades. They were supposed to arrive shortly, according to one of her blood wizards. Gordon, where are Trajan and Probus? She asked her gaunt wizard underling, turning her eyes to the left. Several of her men, well, technically General Karis men that she had borrowed, stood there at attention, waiting for her orders. Her blood trackers weren't present, still out hunting for traces of their anomaly in the city. Lady Helena, they should arrive shortly. They did not give a specific time. The wizard Gordon stepped forward, his voice apologetic. Meanwhile, the massive, 2 miles wide ball of fire began to shoot towards the city, giving off an unholy amount of heat. Helena moved her eyes past the incoming fireball. In the distance, she could make out a roughly 50 meters long dragon, glowing with orange light. Faint trails of fire fled from its wings as it soared. These same orange flames seemed to sheath its entire body, like a warm, comfortable blanket. Damn it, she stamped her foot down in anger, but at the last second caught herself, freezing before it could make contact. She remembered when she accidentally caused the 6th palace of Podor City to cave in, destroying its central roof. She'd managed to blame it on the anomaly they were chasing, saving the Aurelius family some face after her subordinates met with all the palace masters, trying to gather intel. Several hurried movements caught her eye as she stood frozen. She looked up, staring at her subordinates. All of them had jumped backwards several meters, one of the wizards even going so far as to begin to cast a defensive spell. They looked pale-faced and fearful, watching her every movement. She gave them an annoyed glare and then turned her attention to the fireball that was 2/3 of the way to the city. It's king class, and a true, powerful king class. Gordon, send word to Trajan and Probus that they need to get here as soon as possible. A powerful aura began to gather around her as she spoke, her words containing pure authority. This aura gave off a sense of martial might, of physical prowess that could not be stopped. I will engage it for as long as I can. There are too many innocents here. Helena leapt up into the air, sailing through till she landed on the ground, 300 meters away from the city walls. The air around her turned a strange red color, her aura seeping outwards as she glared at the miles-wide fireball bearing down on her. It was like a giant meteor, obliterating everything in its path. The ground in front of her seemed to melt away as the huge star of flame roasted by. Helena clasped her hands together. Impact Magic. Royal Impact Series number 6. Her eyes glowed a brilliant white shade as she squared up, shifting her body slightly to the side. She pulled her right arm back. As she did so, 2 circles of white light formed in the air, one about 2 meters across, and the other 3 meters across, surrounding the first one. Muscles began to bulge and swell on her arms. Grand Meteor Impact. She punched forward. Dorian's eyes opened wide as he heard the message, instantly understanding what was happening. He jumped out his window and pulled himself onto the roof, readying himself to run away. This must be the 11th born that Mello mentioned. How did he find me? He frowned, his mind racing as a sense of danger overwhelmed him. Before he could think any further, another shockwave almost knocked him off his feet. Before his eyes, the massive fireball that had been bearing down on the city abruptly split and fell apart, a large hole drilling through the center of it. Stray blobs of fire shot in all directions, raining down upon the ground outside Podor City for miles. A few of the higher-set balls of fire rained down in the city, setting several residences on fire. The entire horizon had transformed into a massive, blazing storm of fire, stretching for miles. The raw heat of the blaze washed over the city, smothering everyone. Thousands of wizards in the city began casting spells, designed to protect themselves, their charges, and their homes. Every man fought for himself, the situation devolving into a chaotic one. Without a city lord to cement leadership, the defense plans of the city rapidly fell apart. Oh my God! Dorian stared at the apocalyptic scene in horror. This level of power, this was ridiculous. How could one being be this powerful? Think, Dorian, think. He forced himself to calm down, analyzing the situation. A member of the flock was here, and it was able to trace him. If he stayed in the city, it would keep attacking and slaughter thousands. Someone had just blocked its attack, but was unable to stop it entirely. Still, they were able to put up a fight. Think, I need to survive this. The flock member wanted to meet him. As his mind raced ahead of him, a rough plan gradually began to form. He needed more information to be sure it would work, but it was better than nothing. He opened his eyes, a determined look in them. All right, let's go. He leapt away from the roof, headed towards the origin of the firestorm without a shred of hesitation. Chapter 52. Interlude, Side Chapter. Lost Letters and Found Poetry. Excerpt from the written poetry of the anomalous anomaly, year unknown. A dancing fox, a new dawn. Sunlight beckons, a new dawn's day, chasing away the dark night's gray. Proud hills and white forests covered the eye, a frozen world beneath a bold blue sky. In this new dawn, there danced a white fox, in glittering snow and ice and frost. From tree to tree, from hill to hill, the fox danced wherever she will. Come dawn, come noon, the fox yet spun. A dance of joy, a dance of fun. Now marches on, the evening's dark. Does that free dance yet fall apart? Nay, that white fox dances true. From dawn to dusk, she begins anew. And as the light yet fades to gray, that fox prepares a new dawn's day. Excerpt from assorted letters found in the ruins of the world sealed from time, author unknown. Life. Life is pretty rough, not always fair and not always fun. Remember, my friend, that after darkness does come the sun. Look not to the darkness, send your eyes to the sky. Best friend, smile, and think, the adventures we will fly. For yes, life can be rough, but it can also be great. The mystery, the wonder, don't tarry or be late. Dance with a smile, spin with a grin. Fight off the sad, know you will win. I've got faith in you, shrimp, you're a trooper, you are. Things have been rough, but I know you'll make it quite far. So yes, fickle life, is it a dream or a curse? Let the light in you grow, happy feelings do nurse. Chapter 53. Meeting. Note: there appears to be some sort of mobile bug some readers are getting that makes chapters not have paragraph spacing. I'm not sure exactly what is happening, but there isn't any way for me to fix this, since it's not on my end, but on Anime Daily. Nets. I'm sorry to any readers experiencing it. I have informed the AnimeDaily.net staff of the issue. Oh ho, what's this? My first fire was broken? Not bad, fair maiden. My respect, you've earned a token. But wisdom is what I seek, like these words I do share. Please, share your knowledge on perfection, without a care. The dragon's words echoed in her ears, this time in a language she understood. Helena grit her teeth, her arms held up in a guard position as the massive, orange dragon landed on the ground in front of her, a long trail of flames searing the air behind it. Its head turned to focus down on her, at a slight angle. Its form seemed almost incorporeal, a mixture of energy, flames, and flesh that was almost indistinguishable. Not only that, the air around it vibrated with a raw sense of almighty power. The aura of a king-class beast. The Lord class and the King class. The two levels were both insanely strong, in comparison to weaker creatures. But between the two classes, there lied an incredible gap. A Lord class being was one that had gained enough of an understanding of the laws of the universe to imbue at least one law into their aura. Helena had gained an understanding of the law of might. A universal law that focused entirely on massive strength, on achieving the ultimate source of power, by imbuing one's attacks with the very essence of might. She studied impact magic, one of the three great physical magics, apart from sundering magic and piercing magic. She had gained her understanding of the law of might from her studies and from live combat. She was a powerful vampire that had trained her body to the very limit, practicing 14 hours every single day against countless powerful opponents and foes. As a child, she was hailed as a genius, a prodigy without equal in terms of physical prowess. She'd trained every single day of her life for the past 47 years, a young age for a vampire, with a singular goal in mind. To become strong enough to fight for her hero, High Lord Marcus. A man who'd sacrificed everything to protect her and her family. She was a powerful, pseudo-king class wizard and warrior, with the elite Aurelius family blood running through her veins. And as she stood looking up at the ephemeral face of the dragon before her, she truly realized the difference between the Lord class and the King class. Achieving the Lord class merely required one to be able to imbue the laws of the universe into one's attacks. In Helena's case, the law of might. Her understanding had reached a point where she could borrow certain aspects and energy from this universal law, integrating it into her attacks. The more she practiced, the stronger her soul would grow, and the stronger her energy level would become. Achieving the King class was a little different. Instead of just being able to borrow strength from a law, one had to completely master it. With the demonic eyes ability, my scanning capacity has been greatly enhanced. Scanning the creatures before you now. Osra's voice rang out in Dorian's head. Before Dorian stood a female vampire, with rather muscular arms, wearing a slim, tight-fitting black dress. She had short, black hair, and the air around her seemed to distort slightly, a hazy red aura surrounding her. Not too far away from her was a giant, several meters tall dragon, dwarfing the small vampire fighter. The dragon had bright, orange scales and was covered in writhing flames. The air around the Leviathan seemed to be on fire as well, a strange aura covering it. Species. True vampire. Class. Lord class. Pseudo-king. Maximum energy level. 98,235. Species. Transcendent flame dragon. Class. King class, middle. Maximum energy level. 847,395. Oh my god, are you freaking kidding me? Dorian's mouth fell down in shock as he stared at the energy figures. He had just been celebrating reaching an energy level of almost 3,000. Yet even the weakest of the fighters before him had an incredible energy level of almost 100,000. And the even larger dragon had a mind-boggling energy level approaching 850,000. He was standing on the western wall of the city, breathing slightly hard from exertion. After coming up with a general plan, he had dashed in the direction of the fireball, moving as fast as he could. The entire city was thrown into chaos at the moment, and no one paid attention to a slim, scaled humanoid running across the city. In his lesser throne demon form, jumping from house to house continuously was no problem. He was far faster and more agile than he was in his giant mire dragon form, though he missed the wings he'd used for gliding. It had taken him only a brief period of time to cross the miles-wide city and arrive at the wall. The guards and fighters that normally patrolled the wall had long since fled, as had most of the wizards in the face of the seemingly unblockable attack. It made it rather convenient for him to stand here, though, so he wasn't complaining. Whoa! A rippling explosion tore through the air as, a few hundred meters from Dorian, the female vampire warrior began to engage the dragon. Even with his vastly enhanced visual acuity and enhanced body, Dorian could only just barely make out the movements of the warrior. She moved incredibly quickly, in extremely fast bursts, unleashing a deluge of blows towards the huge dragon. Every time she punched forward, two glowing white circles would appear near her arms. Dorian couldn't actually see anything leave her hand as she punched, but he could sense and hear the shockwaves created from each attack. A dozen large craters soon formed in the ground, dirt and rock exploding outward up into the air. Blow after blow rained down upon the dragon, colliding with the layer of flames protecting it. Several of these punches actually forced the drake back several meters. A deep, thundering voice rang out. "Your strength is good, it's true, but its perfection is lacking. Allow me to show you true fire, embers that are cracking." The mighty dragon flapped its large wings, causing it to soar backwards 30 meters. As it did so, its chest heaved. The air shook for the briefest instant. A moment later, a pure, white beam of light burst forth from the dragon's mouth. This beam was at least 3 meters across, and shot forward at a blurringly fast speed. The female vampire, meanwhile, seemed to have guessed the dragon's intent, and had dodged to the left just in time before it unleashed its attack. The beam moved so quickly that by the time Dorian was able to register its existence, it had already passed. It slammed into the ground, melting through rock and stone, and pierced through the entire, roughly 80 miles wide plateau that housed Podor City. A long, smooth tunnel of melted rock and air formed, completely seared through. The female vampire was sent tumbling through the air before stopping herself, turning to face the dragon. "Ha ha ha, my beam fire is strong, is it not? Created from my study of flame, it is quite hot." The dragon's odd, rhyming way of speaking washed over Dorian as it paused, looking at the vampire expectantly, as if waiting for something. Just a few moments earlier, Helena's chest heaved, her entire body trembling. Every single sense in her was yelling at her to scream, to run away. That if she stayed, only certain death was left for her. It was the same feeling she got when she had faced General Karras. "You can do this, you need to." Her inner voice rang out as she forced herself to dodge to the side, to keep moving and not let the dragon lock on to her. It was extremely powerful, yes, but it was a known fact that the larger you were, the harder it was to move fast or agilely. Her small, lithe form gave her a big advantage in terms of pure, raw speed. She knew, right here and now, that she needed to stop this dragon for as long as possible. If she didn't, it would almost certainly continue its attack on the city. "Should I go lower in the Royal Series?" she thought, her mind perturbed. The Royal Impact Series was a series of spells created by the forefather of impact magic, Emmanuel Hope. Each number in the series was a unique and powerful spell that carried massive amounts of force. No, she shook her head. Grand Meteor, the 6th impact, was already her limit. Her arms were already throbbing from having unleashed it, and half a dozen other impact spells. As she was thinking this, the giant dragon spoke aloud. "Your strength is good, it's true, but its perfection is lacking. Allow me to show you true fire, embers that are cracking." Its head zeroed in directly on her as it leapt backwards, its great wings fluttering. It began to raise its chest and head. As it did so, the sixth sense that Helena had trained from over 40 years of practice and combat came into play. A deep-set premonition overtook her. Death. If she did not move now, she would die. Impact Magic. Royal Impact Series 12. She cast a spell that she had already stored up the energy for, able to release it with a single thought. World Waterfall Impact. The force of a vast, miles-wide waterfall concentrated just to her right as she let the spell loose. Immediately, her body jerked in the opposite direction, a sonic boom echoing out as she forcibly dodged, moving almost instantaneously. Several of her ribs cracked at the impact, unable to bear the blow. Not a split second later, a blinding beam of light shot into where she'd been standing. A virtual wave of heat washed over Helena, melting through her innate barrier. She felt her skin burn as she covered her eyes, protecting herself. Thud, her body rolled and tumbled on the ground, sliding for a good dozen meters before she managed to smash her right leg down, planting it a foot deep into the earth, stopping herself. She coughed up blood as she forcibly hauled herself to her feet, her eyes watering. Crap, her injuries were severe. Her entire body had been burned, the flesh seared red. She'd protected her eyes, but her arms, legs, and torso were in constant pain. She almost fainted at the agony, but forced herself to stand, raising her hands in a guarded position. A snarl appeared on her face as a crazed light appeared in her eyes. If she was to die, then she should give it everything she had, even her life. She would not fail the High Lord. Ha ha ha, my beamfire is strong, is it not? Created from my study of flame, it is quite hot. The dragon spoke yet again, its voice deep and powerful. Helena listened to the words, and then shook her head angrily. It sounded like it was mocking her struggles against its vast, overwhelming strength. As she looked up at its arrogant, draconic face standing far overhead, she made a mental decision. Her body was currently trying to shut down, the severe damage she'd suffered almost fatal. The situation looked hopeless. She would need to give everything she had. Impact Magic. Royal Impact Series number 3. Her hands shook as she clasped them together, preparing to unleash a spell she knew her body couldn't survive. Energy began to gather in her arms as she readied herself. Before she could fully cast the spell, prepared to sacrifice her life and perish, another voice yelled out, full of cool confidence. Ho, my fellow brother. Fair tidings to thee. Your flames contain powerful might, I do there see. Dorian's voice echoed as he finished yelling and walked up to the side of the city wall. He clenched his fists nervously as he jumped through the air, landing down hard on the ground outside the city wall. He cleared his throat, almost tripping as he did so. The ground near the city wall was cluttered with rocks and debris. The air here was almost unbearable, the ungodly heat washing over him like magma slogging off a volcano. He felt his entire body seem to shrink together, his scales merging to shrug off the heat. The hulking brute of a dragon turned its attention away from the female vampire, its head cocking to the side as it looked at Dorian's diminutive figure. Dorian felt that a similar innate connection he had felt with Mello coming off of the dragon before him, though one that felt very slightly different. Ah, hello. Greetings, fellow brother. The dragon's massive figure shook, the powerful layers of flame around it expanding slightly. Abruptly it began to transform, shrinking inward. In just a scant moment, its massive, 50 meters long form shrank to a much smaller, 8.5 meters long form, only around 4-ish meters high. About the same size as Dorian's regular Mire dragon form. The hazy aura of orange fire stayed around it, however, giving off a feeling of raw, dominating power. I'll shrink, lest my flames do smother. The dragon's voice was higher pitched now as it flew forward, landing a half-dozen or so meters from Dorian. It continued its rhyming speech, not giving him a chance to respond. I've come with a question, fair brother, to ask. Wisdom I do seek, a most difficult task. We search and journey for perfection, to achieve the unachievable. But what is perfection? I look to conceive the inconceivable. The dragon's head nodded as it paused, its eyes growing distant. Dorian stayed focused on it every movement, listening to every word it spoke. His plan was growing more and more solid as his understanding of the dragon grew. The 11th born continued, his words growing louder and louder. Every line he said conveyed a certain degree of power, authority, and importance, as if they held incredible meaning and passion. In my short life, I've heard certain words of wisdom. That perfection is in fire, conveyed deeply with rhythm. So I ask you, to now, speak words in return. Is perfection found in that which must burn? Chapter 54. Giving Aid. Important note, I might take a break Friday, and not post a chapter. Over the past month, I've written an average of 4,000 words a day, every day. An achievement I'm proud of, for managing to work in so much time to expand my story. But also one that has, admittedly, been a bit tiring and taken its toll. So, if there is no chapter on Friday, don't be surprised. Putting this here at the top so people will see it. The dragon's voice was great and terrible in Dorian's ears, containing a majestic air that could not be mimicked. It looked at him, its eyes full of expectation. Dorian kept his cool, a small smile appearing on his face. A peaceful, white aura began to spread out from him as he focused on the life energy running in his veins, activating its fake aura. He needed to remain calm. Words of wisdom you ask for, and words of wisdom I will share. He began, mimicking the poetic phrasing the 11th born used. Hear as I speak to you, my fellow flock member, with care. His rhyme was similar to one the dragon had said, catching its attention. The dragon gave him a quiet nod, its legs settling down as it waited. The entire situation felt incredibly surreal to Dorian, but he didn't let himself slip up. This dragon only spoke in poems. It appeared to have some sort of fixation on rhythm and rhyme. He'd instantly made the decision to speak back in rhyme, figuring it would put him on good terms. As he'd realized this, and listened to the question the 11th born had asked of him, an old, worn poem from Earth came to mind. His voice full of confidence, Dorian began to speak. Some say the world will end in fire. Some say in ice. From what I've tasted of desire, I hold with those who favor fire. But if it had to perish twice, I think I know enough of hate to say that for destruction ice is also great, and would suffice. It was a poem by the great wordsmith Robert Frost from Earth, one that had stuck with Dorian from a college literature class. He spoke confidently, giving the words a smooth flow, his sole goal to make the dragon to calm down and stop unleashing its fiery attacks. The dragon stared at Dorian, its eyes opened wide. It stood absolutely still, unmoving as its mind went over the words he shared. The pulsing life aura Dorian had unleashed gave his words an almost mystic feel, giving them more impact than they would otherwise. A tense moment passed as the dragon stayed still, unmoving. A few seconds after, just as the moment was fading, something unexpected happened. It started to rain. Dorian blinked, keeping his focus locked on the dragon in front of him. Water dripped down his scaled face and body, soaking his arms. The 11th born turned its head up towards the sky, staring at the vast clouds that had appeared out of nowhere. As the rain fell, a small, glowing blue light covered the trembling form of the badly injured female vampire off to Dorian's left. The dragon in front of Dorian seemed to smile as it turned its head back towards him. Young brother, I must give word to say. It seems some rats have come out to play. The words you've shared have touched my heart. But then for now, we must step apart. The dragon leapt backwards, its wings unfolding as its body size expanded, back to its huge, 50-meter-long form. Orange flames flew from its wings, the ever-present heat around it forming a small inferno. A split second later, a weird echo rang out. Dorian clutched at his ears, looking around as he jumped backwards, stumbling to the ground. His vision wavered, everything around him starting to look rather odd. He put his scaled hands on the ground, forcibly making himself shake off the disorientation. He looked up to see a madhouse. The rain that had started falling now seemed to be falling in hundreds of different directions. The water swirled as it moved chaotically, forming into gargantuan streams that moved in strange, ever-shifting patterns. Before Dorian's eyes, even the simple color of the rain began to change. Brilliant greens, deep blues, dark reds, and ascending yellows, a myriad of colors exploded forth, each one seeking to outdo the other. And, all as one, these streams of water began to lash out at the 11th born. More people have come to defend the city? He observed, his eyes scanning the environment. It took him only a brief moment to spot a duo of vampires that had appeared next to the injured female vampire. Species: True Vampire. Class: Lord Class, Pseudo King. Maximum Energy Level: 101,535. Species: True Vampire. Class: Lord Class, Pseudo King. Maximum Energy Level: 105,908. Two more strong ones, he muttered softly. One of them was dressed in a set of slim robes and had a small wand in his hand. He appeared to be directing the streams of water, magical energy flowing off him in waves. The other was a warrior wearing slim, black armor that clung to him tightly, with long brown hair tied up in a bun. His hand was raised above his shoulder, holding on to the hilt of a long, gleaming blade. Right now, with his level of strength, there was no way he could interfere in a fight. The maximum energy level of a being was highly correlated with the overall power that being held. It was a direct measure of the soul and soul spell matrix. The stronger one's soul was, the more powerful their physique, perception of time, or abilities would be. Therefore, he shrugged, and skipped about 100 meters off to the side before sitting down on the ground, and waiting, analyzing everything. Trajan, how much longer can your chaos reign keep it trapped? Probus asked, his eyes narrowing as he stared at their target. Approxima, Trajan began, his eyes glowing. He was immediately cut off. ROAR. The colorful streams of rain exploded into clouds of steam as several spouts of orange fire shot out, shooting into the sky. Okay, you're pathetic, never mind. Probus shrugged, stepping forward. As he did so, an aura began to form around him, faint gray light appearing. His entire physical form seemed to become sharper, as if he could split a mountain with a light touch. Listen here, you little Trajan began, his eyes sparking. Before he could finish, Probus jumped up into the air, his body soaring towards the huge, flying dragon. The gray light that surrounded him began to grow more concentrated, causing the air around him to shimmer. You moron! Rain magic! Time-chained torrent! The wizard yelled at Probus and cast a spell simultaneously, causing all the normal rain that was still falling to abruptly begin to fall in slow motion. Everything that the rain touched began to slow down, the physical movements visually slowing. Debris or rocks that were still falling from the arms of water that Trajan had spawned floated slowly downward, almost hanging in the air. The torrents of fire looked incredibly odd as their movements slowed to a crawl. Probus was unaffected, the wizard taking great care to exclude him. Despite the show they put on, they both moved with confidence and familiarity, signs of long practice together. The massive dragon looked at the rain with curiosity, watching as it fell and touched him. Immediately its body began to slow, though only slightly, the flames that covered it dimming just the slightest bit. Still, it was enough for Probus. I am a simple man. His eyes began to gloss over as he stared at the beast. I see a lizard, I cut. I see a slimy bastard, I cut. The air around the hand clutching the hilt of his sword on his back began to tremble. I see a dragon. His words carried a sense of finality. I cut. Whoosh. Without uttering a spell of any sort, Probus' arm whipped forward. Moving so quickly the air he displaced with his arm's movement created a small sonic boom. He put his full strength into this attack. This, right here, was the target they were to hunt down. A powerful, irrational king-class dragon that had killed or maimed several members of the Aurelius family and spread a massive amount of destruction. He held back nothing. After all, what kind of idiot would wait till the last second to go all out? Such a mentality would lead to an early death. A nearly invisible blade of light shot forth, splitting the air. This blade moved without making a sound, cutting through the slowed raindrops in an almost mystic fashion. It seemed to move slow, but at the same time, incredibly fast. The near-invisible blade of light slammed into the massive dragon before it had time to react. Boom. KSSHHHH. Probus landed on the ground hard, his eyes narrowed as he looked at the result, displeased. The giant transcendent flame dragon had been knocked backwards nearly 600 meters. A huge, gaping wound could be seen, spurting red blood drawn from its right shoulder down to its left leg. A long, stretching crater could be seen in the ground, the power from Probus slicing apart and incinerating any rock or stone it came into contact with. Dust and random rocks could be seen, shooting into the air in slow motion under the effect of Trajan's spell. It took your full strength / Trajan appeared next to Probus, several glowing blue shields shimmering in the air in front of him. It took my full strength / Probus nodded in agreement, his voice carrying a tinge of disappointment. He'd imbued his attack with everything he'd gained in his studies of the law of cutting, one of the more abstruse, complex laws. There were very few things he could not cut in half. The sheer physical durability of that dragon was on another level. Good / young warrior. I commend thy courage, but now, meet perfection, let my fires flourish. The voice of the anomaly rang out, blasting into their ears as it shook off the remnants of Probus / fires swarming around it once more. Gradually, above its head, a massive orb of fire was starting to form, growing and expanding. Deep, orange and red flames blurred together in a massive mixture, giving off an ungodly amount of heat. This is going to get ugly. Probus' voice was completely serious as he replaced his blade on his back, blinking slowly. Oh my god, Trajan stared at the attack, pale-faced with a horrifying realization. Think of what this will do to the environment. Dorian mentally cursed his good nature as he ran towards the downed female vampire warrior. Why couldn't he have been born a shameless, evil villain? Helping her would be dangerous and could get him killed. But even so, he couldn't just leave her to die. Not when the reason all of this was happening was because of him. Off to the side, the two vampires had rushed forward to engage the dragon as it was in the midst of creating another massive fireball. They suffered no time for distraction, putting their full focus on the dragon they were facing. He had already witnessed their incredible strength. That single slash from the sword-wielding vampire had carved out a huge crevice in the earth itself, and moved faster than Dorian was physically capable of seeing at his current level. His mind raced ahead of him as he began to adapt his plan. When the two parties were engaging, and the reason why Dorian was rushing over, he had noticed the female vampire had fallen over from the corner of his eyesight, blood spurting from her mouth. Her collapsed form had gone unnoticed by her comrades as they engaged the 11th born, intent on stopping it. If only I managed to convince it to stop fighting then, he muttered, swearing mentally. At the least, he'd managed to talk to it. Their attack on the dragon had happened at a bad time. Though, perhaps from the dragon's perspective, it had happened at an opportune time. It seemed to be on some sort of mad quest to show off its ideal of perfection, or to gain wisdom from others on what perfection was. His body heaved with exertion from the instantaneous sprint as he slammed down, landing next to the body of the vampire warrior. Now that he was up close, Dorian saw her injuries in person. He had to force himself not to gag. Her entire body was completely seared, save for a few spots on her face and eyes. Her slim, black dress had mostly melted off, disintegrating, and long, horrifying burns covered every inch of her. A light blue aura hovered around her, giving off a cool feeling. Osra, what exactly is wrong with her? He had once aided William in healing from a fatal injury by giving up some blood from one of his draconic forms. There might be some way he could help heal this injured vampire, if he knew more about her wounds. Vampires had a powerful ability to regenerate. Even if she was badly burned like this, she should still be able to heal from it. Her wounds must be far worse than was visible. The only reason she got so badly wounded was because of him, and her brave sacrifice in protecting the city. If he hadn't stayed here in a populated city, this never would have happened. This was his fault. He clenched his fists at the realization, tossing the thought to the side for now. She has suffered multiple degree burns on roughly 88% of her body. Her internal organs have started to fail, the extreme damage she has suffered beginning to overwhelm her natural regenerative process. She appears to have consumed multiple healing medicines in an attempt to heal the injuries, but has only managed to stave them off. Osra continued, some type of restorative water-based spell has been applied to her. However, the burns she's suffered seem to carry the power of law within them, and are not ones that can be easily healed. Is there anything I can do? Dorian queried, staring at the shivering body of the dying vampire. Osra was silent for a moment. There is a possibility, Osra began, taking another moment as if calculating. Yes? Dorian urged. The fire element golden apple you obtained has the condensed energy of the universal law of fire within it. If you eat it now, absorbing its energy, you may also be able to draw in the remnants of law energy in the female vampire's wounds. With the life energy in your lesser life demon form as a counterweight, it's possible you could pull out the fire energy and allow her to survive. Osra continued. The life elemental energy from the life element golden apple has already been absorbed and transformed to your own energy. You should be safe to absorb the remaining natural treasure. Dorian blinked, his mind racing. This was an absolutely awful time to sit down and absorb a rare and powerful natural treasure. He had no idea how the 11th born would react, or the vampires that were now engaging it. But it seemed there was no other way to save her unless he was willing to take this risk. He looked down at the shivering form of the female vampire, watching her wheeze and cough, her tiny body shaking. He sighed, feeling tired. It was the right thing to do. Without hesitation, he pulled out the fire element golden apple from his spatial ring, and swallowed it whole. Chapter 55. Lord Class. Heat, powerful, flowing heat rushed through his veins, like a blazing inferno spreading from his heart to every inch of his body. Molten magma, liquid fire, any and every description that came to Dorian's mind seemed to fit as he felt the raw power moving within him. At the same time, however, he didn't experience pain or feel burned. It was powerful and hot, but a comfortable kind of hot. One that was under his control. As the energy moved about within him, he detected another, similar energy next to him. Within the injured female vampire. He also felt a second energy source, this one extremely vast in scale. He looked towards it, staring at the massive transcendent flame dragon. Several small typhoons of water were currently smashing against the dragon as it formed a gargantuan ball of fire overhead, growing larger and larger every second. A huge cage of water was also forming in the sky overhead, floating above the growing meteor. Whoosh, whoosh. The air seemed to split apart as the warrior of the two vampires attacking the 11th born unleashed attack after attack, blade strikes slamming into the body of the dragon. The flames that covered the dragon managed to absorb most of the impact, this time prepared for the attacks, but several small wounds still appeared on its body, its incorporeal form shivering. Small spurts of blood dripped from its body before immediately evaporating in the heat. Dorian spared them a single worried glance before he turned his full focus and attention on the vampire next to him. "Asra, how'd I absorb the energy in her?" he asked, his thoughts hurried. The female vampire clearly didn't have long to live. Someone that was brave enough to give her life protecting innocence was absolutely someone worth saving in his eyes. Place your hands on her and simply will the energy to flow within you, concentrating the fire elemental energy in your body to flow towards your hands. Asra replied quickly. Dorian did as she said. He placed his scaled hands on each shoulder of the vampire woman, concentrating. He focused his full will on his hands, ordering the fiery energy raging in his body to move there. Gradually, his hands began to grow warm. Slight particles of steam rose from them, the still ongoing rain drizzling. A faint, red glow appeared. Slowly, Dorian started to feel a connection with the woman in front of him. His soul shivered slightly as that connection began to expand, becoming aware of every inch of the woman's body. He winced as he sensed her horrid injuries. As his awareness spread, he felt the same fiery energy in his body running through hers. When this energy was in her, however, it moved without care for her organs or blood. It was ravaging every cell in her body, rampaging without care. He frowned fiercely as he felt this. Come to me." His words were infused with his will, flowing out from his mind. They echoed forth, into the very core of the woman before him. The woman's body shuddered. Abruptly, the rampaging fire energy within her began to move, drawn towards Dorian's hands. It was like he had opened a hole in a container of water, the energy slowly draining out of her and flowing into him. This energy was readily absorbed by his body, becoming a larger and larger store of power. A sheen of sweat appeared on his forehead as he continued, his entire mind focused on saving the female warrior. "Probus, my net's charged," Trajan called out, his eyes bloodshot as he controlled the great rain typhoons he'd spawned, slamming them against the dragon over and over. Small beams of fire constantly blasted his way, forcing him to dodge repeatedly as the drake looked at him, annoyed. It was still charging its massive fireball, one that had spread to be at least 3 miles wide now, floating high in the sky. Instead of trying to directly attack them, it was mostly ignoring them, creating its own super attack. It was a true king-class beast. His great rain typhoons could only distract it and weaken its fire defenses, enough for Probus to cut through them. One of his strongest spells could do basically no real damage to it. "Got it," Probus yelled out as he unleashed several more blade attacks, muscles in his right arm bulging as his sword blurred, moving so quickly it was nearly impossible to track. He began to move backwards, lining himself up between the city and the dragon. The sharp aura around him began to condense, becoming stronger and stronger. All they'd done was manage to injure it, repeatedly. With the raw, virile energy a king-class beast had, it would regenerate from the wounds they'd left it without fail if they gave it time. Trajan nodded, his eyes narrowed. He had taken all of this into account. He glanced up briefly, looking at the massive, watery net that was forming above the dragon's fireball. His arms shook as he maintained his focus. His Empyrean rain net, it was a king-class spell, and casting it had cost him 2/3 of his energy. He barely had enough left in him to dodge and manipulate those typhoons. "Keep focus, foe," He cut himself off, his eyes widening in shock. A massive outburst of fiery energy had appeared in his senses, directly behind him. He spun around, his attention split between maintaining his net, controlling the typhoons, and whatever had appeared behind him. Back where they'd left Helena to recover, under the protection of his blue healing rain, a small ball of fire had blasted into the air, giving off a heavy, pure feeling of fire. That ball of fire had emerged from a scaled humanoid who was clutching into Helena's shoulders. Is that a demon? What? His eyes opened wide in shock and confusion, and a mild bit of pleasure that a species he thought was extinct had reappeared. Before he could do anything else, however, the giant dragon above them spoke aloud. You've hit me, and had your turn. Now I command. The world shall burn. The gargantuan ball of fire it had spawned was unleashed. It spanned at least 5 miles in scale. Boiling fire blazing trails of infernal heat, it was a miniature sun unto itself, a devastating star of flame that would incinerate anything in its path. The air around it distorted and shivered under the vast influence of the dragon's attack, the power inherent in it simply too strong. An attack of this scale could devastate the entire city behind them. In fact, it could decimate the entire plateau this city rested on. The sheer might within it was ridiculous. Trajan dropped his typhoons and spun back, his eyes closing as he clasped his hands together. Rain magic. Empyrean rain net, seal. The last bit of energy left in him vanished, spent up as he finished casting his spell and yelled aloud. Probus, cut the plan, save Helena. Dorian's vision had been replaced by 1,000 lines of red light. Everywhere he looked, the red lines seemed to pull and tug, showing different levels of heat, of energy, of power. Asra's voice rang out in his mind. Your current form's life elemental energy is interacting with the fire elemental energy, and overloading your system. The energy has been successfully absorbed, but your current form is unable to bear the brunt of the heat. His lesser throne demon form was powerful, but it wasn't designed to handle raw, elemental fire energy. The fire energy was unlike the life energy. It was dangerous and wild, full of powerful heat. Even with his life energy acting as a baseline and protecting him, his body still couldn't bear it. If it had just been the energy from the golden apple, Dorian might have been able to handle it. Asra was able to direct that energy and help him control it. The energy he absorbed from the female vampire, however, was like a deadly poison, running wild and rampant. It was nearly uncontrollable. His eyes shook as he tried to gain control of the power, feeling it start to go wild inside him. His entire body began to shake. Okay, he mentally sputtered, letting go of the female vampire. He had successfully managed to pull all the fire energy out of her body. As he let go, he vaguely saw her open her eyes wide, blinking and staring up at him. Dorian fell to the ground and instantly assumed a sitting position, meditating. Control it, control, I must control it. His mind concentrated, doing everything he could to will the virile energy to stop. He completely ignored his surroundings, focused only on himself. In the sky above, the apocalyptic meteor of fire was currently being surrounded by a massive, blue net. A hurricane of white steam blasted out, spreading across the sky as these two forces collided, sending the entire area into a storm of fog. Gradually, Dorian's faded green scales began to take on a red tinge. He gave off heat, steam escaping from his body. It's not working. He instantly came to the conclusion as he felt his body start to turn, the effects of the energy beginning to damage him. Even with his near-perfect self-control, he was unable to get a full handle of the fire energy. Very well, then, Plan B. He didn't hesitate, his head nodding sharply as he went with his backup plan. Asra, evolve me into a fire imp. Evolving, his entire body shifted, the red lights flashing in his eyes as his form began to transform. The life aura that surrounded him began to turn inward and vanish as his body changed shape. His body began to grow smaller, condensing inward to roughly a meter. His clawed hands began to shift, becoming tiny, incorporeal flame hands. Streams of warm fire began to wrap around his body. His head began to glow a bright orange, transforming into a mass of flames. Before he even finished transforming, however, a notification appeared in his head. Your fire imp form has undergone a mutation, consistent with the fire elemental energy in your body alongside traces of the law of fire. This mutation has set off a chain reaction in your soul. If this is not addressed, there is a non-zero chance your soul will dissipate. His eyes flashed. How do I address this? His head was starting to feel hazy, the colossal heat running in his body making him feel as if everything seemed a bit odd. His mind was unstable, the world around him feeling as if it wasn't quite real. It is recommended to combine your fire imp bloodline with your lesser throne demon bloodline. If you infuse your remaining energy points, I should be able to extrapolate a valid combination and avoid the soul adaptation period without too many serious side effects. Do it. Maybe he would waste his points, but that was better than dying. This had turned out a bit more dangerous than he thought it would be. Acknowledged. Asra's voice rang out in his mind as she responded. Combining bloodlines. His half-formed fire imp body vibrated and then began to expand, from its diminutive meter-tall height to a taller 2.5 meters in scale. Pain began to radiate from Dorian's body as his arms and legs twisted, changing. His skin turned pitch black, darker than night. His hands transformed back into humanoid hands, maintaining the same coal-black color. His feet became vaguely humanoid, but with 3 claws instead of toes. A black, humanoid mask covered his face, with small strings of black fire rising off it. Behind that mask, an enormous ball of fire constantly exploded, lighting his shoulders and head constantly aflame. His arms were covered in a pair of black gauntlets, with red fire rising out from the end of each, where his elbows were. 2 sets of similar gauntlets covered his lower legs, small gouts of fire expanding from his knees. Image. https://www.epicpath.org/images/thumb/117/ifrit4.png/ifrit4.png closing parenthesis. His new form virtually radiated power and heat. Combination complete. New form acquired. A small blip of information appeared in Dorian's mind as he closed his eyes, feeling a sense of might within him. Ifrit. Lord Class, Early. Maximum Energy Level. 10,565. Ability. Fire Sense, Life Sense, Demonic Eyes, Constant Regeneration. Powerful demons born with an innate connection to the elements of both fire and life. The exact origin of the Ifrit is unknown, but the raw power of this species is inarguable. They have the ability to constantly heal from injuries, drawing upon the energy of the universe around them to restore their wounds. Nearly immune to fire-based attacks. Note. The maximum energy level, in this context, is the strongest a creature can become through natural growth. Training in mystic martial arts or magic can greatly enhance the strength of a creature beyond their normal limits. Your soul has forcibly accepted the adaptation and grown your new bloodline to its maximum growth stage, using up the absorbed elemental energy. Due to the resulting backlash, you will fall unconscious in roughly 11 minutes. The risk of death for this transformation was approximately 7%, but has successfully been avoided. Asra's was cool in Dorian's mind. Dorian opened his eyes, small flames gleaming out of them. Got it. His eyes narrowed as he took in the situation before him. He needed to act fast. Chapter 56. Standing Alone. All Helena could feel was unending fire and pain, racking her body over and over. Constant torture that dug cinders into her mind, leaving behind embers that seared her soul, over and over. It was the worst agony she had ever felt in her life. Focus, Helena, she mentally yelled, trying to will her body to heal. The natural regeneration of a vampire was fearsome, especially for her, a pseudo-king-class vampire. The searing beam that Dragon had sent out was far too powerful for her defenses to handle. She had managed to dodge the brunt of the attack, but even the damage from just the air around it was too much. The beam of fire the transcendent flame dragon had spat was made up of pure, concentrated fire energy, derived from the law of fire. It was an attack one could use only if one had obtained complete mastery of a law, the bar for entering the king class. A bar that Helena had been trying to surpass for a decade now, and constantly failed. The biggest failure of her life. Over and over the pain washed upon her soul, smashing into her, burning her, trying to make her give up. Her strength of will began to waver, tears forming in her eyes as the world began to transform into blackness. No, please no, her voice began to lose its edge, becoming small. Please, I cannot fail now. Memories began to flash through her. Memories of her growing up in the Aurelius family. Of her loving parents, two relatively normal vampires that served as bookkeepers in one of the family headquarters. Memories of them dying before her eyes during the invasion of light by the Shade Commune, more than 40 years ago. Her pitiful weakness, unable to so much as raise a hand to protect them. Memories of being alone, of being captured, taken to be a slave. Memories of her hero, High Lord Marcus, saving her, but suffering a terrible wound in return. His gentle smile as blood spurted from a horrid slash on his chest, a wound that was cursed to never fully heal. Memories of the constant years she had trained, over and over, never letting herself slack off. All for the chance to redeem herself, to protect the man that would give up everything to protect her. And now, in the end, she could not even protect herself. She had failed. Guilt, shame, rage, anger, despair, loss. A plethora of emotions washed over her as darkness began to take over. The world began to close itself off from her. And, once more, she was alone. Please. As her consciousness began to fade, she sent out one last, quiet call, begging. Please help me. Silence greeted her. Come. Just as she'd lost all hope, a voice appeared in Helena's consciousness. An honest, powerful voice, full of confidence, care, and sadness, the emotions in it visible to Helena. It rocked her to her core, flowing through every fiber of her being. Like a beam of light in a sea of darkness, this voice called out to Helena, echoing through her soul. Come to me. Helena's eyes opened up, a burning light appearing in them once more. Ifrit. Growth stage. 4 quarters, Elder Ifrit. Growth progress 0/0. His forced emergency transformation had allowed him to fully grow his bloodline, in addition to skipping the soul adaptation period, though risking death in the process, as well as forcing him to fall unconscious in a few minutes. If he hadn't just swallowed a natural treasure, he had no doubt that such a risk would have ultimately killed him. Dorian pushed the information to the side as he blinked, looking forward. The world around him had transformed into a maze of steam. White fog that littered the sky, obscuring his vision. That fog rapidly faded, however, as an enormous, gaping meteor of flame slammed into the ground in front of him and began hurtling toward the city. Bright streaks of orange fire exploded off of it, rippling in the air. Dorian stared up at the giant ball of flame, his eyes calm as he analyzed everything. His senses had grown stronger in his new form. In particular, his ability to sense energy. He could tell that this vast meteor of flame had been weakened, its attack power reduced by roughly 2/3 of its peak. Despite that, if the ball of fire was left unchecked, it would blast into the city and devastate it, wiping out hundreds of thousands of lives. He had approximately 6 seconds to react. He took a deep breath and stepped forward, his fists clenched. Probus threw himself forward, his body moving so quickly it was a blur. The sharp aura that surrounded him cut the air in front of him, allowing him to reduce the tug of friction, and vastly increase his speed. It took him only a split second to appear next to the downed Helena, and the creature that was attacking her. His eyes were cold as he slammed down, cracks appearing in the earth due to the force of his landing. The attacker appeared to be some type of humanoid, with pitch-black skin. It was oddly built, with a mass of flames coming from its head, arms, and knees. It was emanating a dangerous air, but, for some odd reason, stopping its attack on Helena, and instead looking up at the massive ball of fire that was rushing towards them. Trajan couldn't stop it? Probus was temporarily shocked as he came to the realization. Trajan's Empyrean Rain Net was a king-class spell that was incredibly powerful. Its strongest use was in sealing the energy of a creature or object. Their original plan was for Trajan to seal the anomaly, and for him to slice it apart. Trajan's net would reduce the defenses of the beast to virtually nothing, while his blade strikes would literally rip it apart. A simple plan, but it is often the simplest of plans that succeeded. They had killed 2 other king-class opponents using this method. His own pure, physical might combined with Trajan's tactical spells made them an incredibly potent duo, albeit one with completely different focuses. Right now, however, their plan had been thrown into chaos due to the appearance of the creature standing near Helena. No, he realized, as his mind processed all these thoughts in a split second. Even if this humanoid hadn't appeared, they still would have failed. Trajan's spell somehow failed to seal the attack of the anomaly, meaning the net wouldn't have landed on it anyway. Some sort of colossal mistake must have taken place. The city was lost. His sword technique was powerful, but he had no confidence in splitting an attack of this scale. He needed to save Helena and get out of the way. First, though, he'd take care of her attacker. His hand rested on the hilt of his blade as he turned towards the distracted creature, his eyes cold. Just as he was about to strike, he felt a hand latch onto his foot, tugging him backwards. He looked down in surprise as he saw the still recovering face of Helena shake her head fiercely, blood spurting from her lips as her body trembled. "It broke through my net." Trajan stumbled backwards, his eyes fogged. His body shook with exhaustion as he looked up at the fireball headed towards the city, his mind ablaze with a single thought. How? His Empyrean rain net had never failed him. It was an incredibly complex spell, but one that perfectly matched the law of rain that he studied, a law that branched off from the law of water. It was extremely powerful, and its strongest ability lied in sealing things. His senses were incredibly in tune with his net when he cast it, the spell under his complete control. He had commanded the fully charged net to descend, intending on sealing the fire energy in the anomaly's attack and using it to help power his net to trap the great dragon. This would leave it vulnerable, for a brief period of time, to Probus /sword style. The plan should have been foolproof. Yet, at the exact moment that his net had made contact with the gaping ball of fire, something odd had happened. The rampant energy in the huge blaze had seemed to shift, slightly. A good deal of that energy collided with the net and was subsequently sealed. But at least a third of it somehow managed to slip through and continue unabated. It was something that should have been impossible. His net was by no means perfect. He considered himself a master in using the spell, and was able to, on average, seal 98% of the energy of any being or object. If he was extremely unlucky, it was possible he'd only seal 95% or 94%. But, somehow, his net had seemed to almost willingly miss a massive part of the energy, sealing only around 67% or 68% of it. Somehow, through sheer luck or fate, roughly 32% to 33% of the energy in the attack had managed to slip through, completely undeterred. As he looked at the fireball blaze by, his hands fell to the side, listless. He had failed, for the first time in his life. The ever-present gleam of mirth he always shared with Probus seemed to fade from his eyes as he watched the attack fly towards the city, towards the unwitting civilians, unable to come up with a response. 3 seconds had passed. In that time, Dorian had activated his condense ability and dashed forward, charging towards the fireball. It had been launched down at an angle, and was now blazing along next to the ground towards the city. His Ifrit form was powerful, and had a mix of fire energy and life energy running through its veins. Using the condense ability had a similar function for if he used it in his lesser throne demon form. The raw elemental energy running in his veins condensed, vastly increasing his power. Increased energy level, 54,027. A small notification appeared in his mind, informing him of how strong he roughly was in this condensed form. Far stronger than he had previously been, his body containing a huge level of strength. The energy level of a creature was a good estimate for the raw power it held. For virtually all beings, this included the power of law that they infused into their attacks and soul. The physique of a being could only become so powerful, after all. This was the commonly accepted belief in the 30,000 worlds. Only by using the power of law could one vastly increase the power of their soul spell matrix, and their strength, usually through magic or mystic martial arts. Dorian's energy level represented the maximum amount of raw, physical strength he could output, without borrowing energy from the laws of the universe. He currently was unable to use the power of law, having never gotten the chance to actually take the time needed to study it. As he analyzed the notification, his face remained neutral. His condensed form was strong, but barely half as strong as the female warrior that had gotten nearly destroyed by the dragon with ease. 2 seconds remained till the massive fireball reached him, the time slightly lessened due to him rushing towards it. He currently stood roughly 800 meters away from the city wall, his feet firmly planting into the ground. He took a deep breath as he looked up at the giant blaze, his heart steady. When he had gained this form, the body of an Ifrit, and the instinctive knowledge that came with it, Dorian had instantly adapted his plans, knowing what he needed to do. Ifrits, in terms of physical prowess, were not particularly mighty demons among the mostly extinct demon race. Their natural physical growth put their strength, at maximum, to around the early Lord class. Compared to other Lord-class or even King-class demons, they were quite weak. That said, they did have a specialty, an aspect that set them apart. Their mastery of life energy gave them incredibly powerful regenerative capabilities, as well as innate ability to learn life magic and its related fields. But, more specifically, their incredible mastery of fire energy gave them virtual immunity to fire-based attacks. And, even more than that, it gave them incredible control over the element of fire. In the past, thousands of years ago when demons walked the 30,000 worlds, the mighty Ifrits of old were known by a different name to some. The rulers of flame. A second passed. Dorian raised his armored hands upward, fiercely feeling the devastating heat in the flames that were crashing towards him. His concentration didn't waver as he bent his knees slightly and took one final breath. The last second faded. The world seemed to stand still as the gargantuan meteor of fire slammed into the proud figure of a single Ifrit, standing alone in the face of death. Chapter 57. Success. End of Volume 2. The moment Dorian's hands touched the fireball, a near-invisible layer of energy seemed to coat the front of the massive meteor. The intangible ability Ifrits held. Fire sense, the ability to manipulate and sense fire. It was a stronger version of the power fire imps and the fire-aspected creatures held. It allowed Dorian to latch onto the meteor of flame as if it were a solid object. The energy wasn't something Dorian could absorb, it was directed and powerful, unlike the remnant energy on the female vampire's body. Dorian's arms trembled as he leaned forward, muscles bulging. His legs dug into the ground, sinking an entire foot into the rocky earth. The stone beneath him cracked and shattered, stone and debris flying into the air. Whoosh. In a single second Dorian's body smashed backwards 50 meters. His legs were firmly dug into the earth, and as a result he left 2 50-meter-long gouges in the ground. He pulled up every iota of strength he had as he pushed back against the meteor, the unforgiving heat searing forth. It's heavy. Dorian's mind was hazy as he was pushed back another 50 meters. In his condensed form, his body was far stronger and far more resilient, allowing him to survive the burden he was holding, at least for now. This giant meteor had an incredible amount of force behind it, as well as the searing heat infused with the power of law. A regular creature would be incinerated merely by touching it. Even in his condensed form, the only reason Dorian was able to handle it was because of his unique race, as an Ifrit. Arrgh. Dorian yelled out loud as he was thrown back another 100 meters, the gouges in the earth expanding. His arms had grown numb, as had his legs. His bones were starting to creak, dangerously close to breaking. Blood began to seep out of a few small cracks on his skin, vaporizing instantly in the heat. It's too much, he thought, panting. His eyes were beginning to cloud over, his mind close to collapsing. The awe-inspiring heat and pressure was far too much for him to bear. I can't stop this. The realization dawned on him. The attack was simply too strong. Everyone in the city is going to die because of me. His body was pushed back another 100 meters. And then another 100 meters. Halfway to the city wall. Fire blazed out of his arms and legs, a physical sign of exertion as he struggled and strained, to no avail. No, he refused to give up. His mind raced ahead of him, analyzing everything. His hazy mental state made thinking difficult, fogging up his head. As he struggled to stop the meteor, a stray thought popped up. A vision of one of his first physics lessons. The memory was blurry, but one point stood out in particular to Dorian. An object in motion will remain in motion, unless acted upon by an external force. Newton's first law of motion. This massive meteor was heading straight for the city. If Dorian wanted to stop it, he would have to create an equal amount of force. A sheer impossibility for him. But what if he didn't try to stop it at all? Stopping it may be impossible for him. But what about simply changing the direction it was moving in, just slightly? The motion of the fireball was purely forward, with no downward impetus. Any downward force it had been neutralized when it collided with the ground and began blazing forward. His consciousness latched onto the idea like a lost man at sea grasped onto a lifeboat, refusing to let go. His legs still dug into the ground, steam escaping out of them due to exertion. However, instead of trying to forcibly stop the fireball, he began to focus his entire strength on blasting it upwards. The momentum of the meteor was focused straight towards the city. Dorian sank deeper into the ground as he lifted with all his might, willing his body to pull out his every last reserve. His lungs heaved and his vision went completely black, blinded from the effort as he raised the enormous, gaping fireball above him, and physically threw it upward. The earth below him had transformed into a massive, 20-meter-wide crater, the entire weight of the meteor resting on Dorian's shoulders for the briefest moment. Whoosh! He collapsed, falling to the ground. His vision remained black, his body trembling from exertion. A ringing noise echoed in his ears as his vision gradually returned. He coughed up blood as he forced himself to stand, maintaining his condensed state. As his sight restored itself, he turned himself around, his heart in his throat as he looked at the city behind him. The colossal meteor of flame that had threatened to annihilate the city, and everyone in it, was blazing through just barely 100 meters above the city. The distance was expanding as it moved higher and higher, redirected because of Dorian's efforts. The powerful heat it sent off injured some, but due to the distance, and because the attack was weakened, the number of casualties was drastically low. A few palace towers exploded, destroyed in the blaze, but the majority of the city was left unscathed. Dorian mentally cheered, a rush of happiness buzzing into his mind. He put a serious face on, however, as he turned around, looking towards the direction where the fireball had come from. At a large dragon covered in brilliant orange flames. "Brother, what is this? You stopped my attack? My perfection for them, you have taken it back?" The 11th Born's voice was strangely calm as it flew down and landed, ignoring the vampires. It still gave off a mighty, arrogant aura, one that was completely unperturbed. The injuries it had taken had already fully healed, not a trace of blood on it. Dorian stepped forward towards the great, blazing drake, his voice calm and collected. His body's condition was anything but good, suffering several cracked bones and torn muscles. He ignored all of that, however, putting on a facade of confidence. Words seemed to flow from his tongue as he responded to the dragon, responding in kind. "My brother, we journey for perfection, yes, it is true. But what is perfection if it's shared with just a few? Spreading pain and death, the sins we accrue. It cheapens perfection, for me and for you. You could burn your flames and spread them anew. Or stop and consider the things we might do. Perhaps perfection can be found in fire, a blaze askew. But what of ice, earth, light, other elements in lieu? Consider this, then, before you blaze your debut. Seek perfection without killing, a simple breakthrough." As the last words left his mouth, Dorian felt a twisting sensation spread over him. Reality began to distort, for just the briefest moment before his eyes. Dorian felt his soul seem to shake, a feeling he had felt once before. The feeling vanished as quickly as it came, almost completely undetectable. The giant dragon stood facing Dorian. It was silent for a few moments, its gaze boring into Dorian as if it could see his very soul. The crackles of the various fires spread out, echoing in the still air. In the background, Dorian could make out screams and yells inside the city as people cowered in terror, the massive fireball that had just passed shocking many. The mighty aura that surrounded the 11th Born abruptly began to fade. "Your words, I must consider. You have given me thought. A battle was had, one that was hard fought. A journey, I shall take, to seek for perfection. Other elements I shall seek, the peak I shall threaten." The enormous dragon flushed its wings out as its voice thundered, shaking the air itself. Streams of orange fire blasted off its wings behind it in a 100-meter-wide pillar. "Younger brother, stay strong, and may your journey hold true. To a world of ice I shall travel, I bid you adieu." The 11th Born leapt up into the air, its wings blazing behind it. A small tornado of fire scattered around the air below it, buffeting Dorian slightly. Whoosh! He forced himself to hold his footing as he watched the great dragon take off, his confident visage never cracking. Internally, he wasn't panicking either. He was simply too tired to care anymore. The massive drake flew high into the sky and began to turn, its body shimmering as it left the area, heading off towards another city-state, towards a distant world bridge. Dorian watched the drake fly off, slowly turning into a dot in the distance. He smiled, looking down at his fists. He'd won. Fatigue and exhaustion began to crash down upon him. A few mental alerts went off in his head as Asra informed him he was about to fall unconscious, partly due to a backlash from his forced evolution growth. There was no risk of death from this, but falling unconscious in this form outside the city wasn't exactly an ideal situation. His body twisted back toward the city as he began to collapse, unconsciousness sweeping over him. The last thing he saw before darkness took over was an image of that female vampire he had saved rushing towards him, blood spurting out of her mouth as she ignored her injuries to catch him before he hit the ground. On a world far from Taprisha, tens of thousands of stone towers rose into the sky, several dozen meters thick and hundreds of meters high. Each tower was built out of a pure, black rock, worn down by the passage of time and the ever-present wind that blew on this world. Fog covered the base of these stone towers, enshrouding them in mystery. Many of the towers were hollow inside, carved and used, in the past, as dwelling places. Mysterious symbols covered the hollow towers, from a language long since lost to the 30,000 worlds. The ruins of a civilization from long ago. Perched on the top of one of these stone towers, a small, diminutive figure could be seen. A black-skinned humanoid, with long, pointed ears, and bright blue hair. A calm, peaceful air rose around this creature as it looked out at the towers that stretched all the way to the horizon. "Ah, I see you finally found your way to me." The black-skinned humanoid sighed and stood up, stretching its body as it turned around. On another stone tower, just a few dozen meters away, a second figure shimmered into existence. A vampire wearing a smooth pair of black leather pants, and a relaxed gray vest with a white undershirt. A smooth jawline and piercing green eyes complemented his handsome face, one that was currently cold and merciless. His long white hair was wrapped up, atop his head in a bun, with an ornamental needle keeping it in place. "High Lord Marcus, I presume. Leader of the Aurelius family of vampires," the black-skinned humanoid said, nodding his head. The vampire's face twitched, an uncontrolled hint of fury instantly buried. High Lord Marcus spoke aloud. "Give me a single reason why I shouldn't bury your soul here and now, Cretan. The chaos and death you have spread in my realm is unacceptable." His voice boomed out as he spoke, shimmering forth with such force that the air around him visible distorted. As he spoke, a pure, glowing red halo appeared above his head. This halo gave off no aura or air of its own, yet the simple appearance of it held a feeling of solidness and power that could not be ignored. The black-skinned humanoid smiled, unfazed by the raw power and fury the vampire was releasing. "Because, dear High Lord, you cannot." The creature continued, "I have thousands of clones. My true form could be any single one. To track them all would be a sheer impossibility." The black-skinned humanoid shook his head. "The chaos and death your realm has experienced certainly has been horrid." He gave the vampire a sympathetic look. "Neither of us want that to continue. Therefore, dear High Lord, I was hoping you and I could come to an arrangement." The black-skinned humanoid was silent as it looked at the High Lord patiently. Its eyes gleamed with an unknown light. High Lord Marcus's fist shook for an instant with rage before he regained control of his emotions. His voice raged out as he demanded, "Who are you?" The black-skinned humanoid smiled once more. "My name is Mello." Chapter 58. Backlash. Start of Volume 3. A large, deep blue lake spread out for miles, teeming with life. Healthy, well-kept oak trees surrounded the lake, planted amongst large swaths of bright green grass. A large river connected to the north of this lake, rustling past peacefully in the mid-morning light. To the west of this lake was a small keep, built out of aged gray stone. Rustic wooden platforms surrounded the edges of this castle, a restoration process clearly ongoing. A paved stone path led to the entrance of the keep. The path moved off in the other direction towards a populated city, many miles from here. Atop the highest point in this castle a flagpole rose, bearing a large, lightly glowing white flag, white sparks flowing from it. 6 golden circles crossed each other on this flag, forming a unique shape. A small wooden boat floated near the center of the lake. Aboard that wooden boat were 2 figures. One was an aged, elderly man, muscular and bulky despite his elderly status. He had tan, leathery skin, and a wizened face. He was completely bald, with a grand and long, bushy white beard. A kind smile could be seen on his face as he held onto a black fishing rod, pulling on it slightly. He wore a set of simple white robes, adorned with small golden patterns on the edges. A necklace hung around his neck, with an icon of a golden sun hung at its base. He gave off the aura of a priest or holy man. The only thing that separated him from being a human was the small, black aura that rose from his hands. The telltale sign of the Shade race, a race of humanoids that looked virtually identical to humans except for the dark points found on the back of each hand, and the fact that they didn't bleed red, but instead, black blood mixed with strange, black energy. The other man on the boat had a younger appearance, his face unlined by age. He had the same tan skin, and was also muscular, but more of a lean kind of muscular. Instead of an adorned white robe, he wore a set of faded gray leather armor, the insignia of a golden sun emblazoned upon it. The same necklace of a golden sun rested around his neck. His hands were wrapped, hiding the dark point that each shade had, causing the black aura to dissipate. He was currently waiting patiently as he looked at the aged, white-robed man in front of him. The older of the two spoke aloud, pulling slightly on the fishing rod in his hands. "You doubt the direction of the church, Isaac?" His voice was deep and enthralling, full of charisma and warmth. He looked at the younger man, giving him a kind smile. "No, High Priest," Isaac said, bowing his head apologetically. "I merely do not see the point in aiding that creature." He gestured vaguely back at the castle off to the side of the lake. The old man smiled again. "I understand your worries, Isaac. With His Highness Keldon off clashing with the Aurelius and Augustus families, we are spread thin at the moment." He paused, setting the fishing rod down to the side, and turning to give his full attention. The way to salvation is not always a clear path. Obstacles will appear, whether through our own thoughts or through the actions of others. He raised his hands as he spoke, his eyes radiating light and passion. "We Shades are a race others claimed must live in darkness, decrying us as evil for tens of thousands of years. Yet now, the Church of Light has spread to all of the Shade race, and salvation is at hand for all. We are mightier than we have ever been before." He continued, "Peace dominates the land. Every man and woman is treated equally, everyone has enough food to eat and water to drink. Slavery is abolished, and crime has widely fallen. No longer are we forced to live under the rule of others." He nodded his head. "Our job is not an easy one, Isaac. To spread the word of light to all is our calling. Many of our missionaries have fallen in the field, killed by those who would silence the word." He sighed, real and tangible sadness infused within his voice. "I understand that." Isaac broke in, his body trembling as he was caught up in the charisma of the high priest. "I just don't understand how that creature fits in with the word. Why we must hunt down other beasts for it. The word of light doesn't condone pointless killing." A confused expression dawned his face. The high priest simply smiled once again. "What the church needs, right now, is a symbol, young Isaac. Something the common people can look up to, and know that only by believing in the light can they find salvation. After all, without the common people, what are we?" His eyes glinted, continuing. "And we have been given an opportunity, praise the light in its infinite benevolence, to create that symbol." He nodded his head sharply. "All we must do is help the 20th born reach its highest form. We shall help it become a true angel of light, and spread the word of light to all." Dorian blinked, soft white and red light causing him to stir awake. His consciousness came awake instantly, the usual bleariness caused from waking up absent. Dorian looked around in confusion, scanning his surroundings. All around him, an expansive, white stone floor spread out, seamless, with no cracks or imperfections. In the distance, the horizon gradually faded into white fog, making this world seem endless. Far, up above, a small, glowing red orb could be seen. Every direction he looked, endless white nothingness spread out. The only thing on this world was him, and the stone floor beneath him, and the red orb giving off light above. Initializing soul scanning metrics. Soul spell matrix repair process preliminary scan engaged. Osra's familiar voice rang out in Dorian's head. "Where am I, Osra? What is happening?" he asked aloud. The area looked somewhat familiar, the white fog in the distance similar to the evolution space he could envision with his soul spell matrix. "Your body suffered an enormous amount of strain. The injuries you suffered were severe, including highly damaging genetic corruption due to your use of condensed elemental energy. In addition, your soul was injured due to you forcibly ignoring the soul adaptation period and combining unadapted forms." Osra began, her voice rattling off information coolly. "Due to this, your mind and body have entered a dormant state. Because of a lack of energy, your soul spell matrix is repairing the damage by drawing on the natural energy of the world around you. Dorian blinked as he heard his situation, sighing. It seemed he'd managed to survive, but only just barely. The injury to the soul is fully treatable, but only if you remain in a dormant state. If you choose to awaken now, the injury may remain permanent and limit your future growth, in addition to a non-zero chance of death. Asra finished. All right, he shrugged. It didn't seem he had much choice here. He'd made his decisions, and maybe others, if they were in his place, would think they were foolish. But he would stick by his morals. This was a life he'd live with no regrets. So where, exactly, is this? He repeated his question. Your consciousness is resting within the nucleus of your soul spell matrix. This is a representation of it, created from your own expectations. It is under your control. Asra's answer was concise. He looked around, again noting the lack of, well, anything really. He glanced upward at the red orb in the sky, about 20 meters above him. Is that William? William's soul was encased in a cocoon of energy, protected from dissipation. He had around a year till that energy fell apart, and William died for real. If he didn't manage to make William a body that perfectly matched his soul's wavelength, that would be it for him. The only reason William had ended up as he was because of his brave sacrifice, saving Dorian's life. Come hell or high water, there was no way Dorian wouldn't do his damnedest to save him in return. Yes, the cocoon of energy encasing the soul of the human you saved is currently bonded just outside of the nucleus of your soul spell matrix. Asra replied, echoing in his head. Unlike when he was in his evolution space, he couldn't see the ball of light that represented Asra here. Okay, what is this form? He queried, rubbing his chin. He looked down at his body, staring at it. His form was that of a human. He held his hands up in front of him, waving in front of his face. He wasn't super muscular or super thin, though he wasn't overweight either. He was slightly lean, with short brown hair and piercing blue eyes. This is how you envision your soul. Asra replied. Huh, he looked himself up and down. Ever since he'd come to this strange universe, his view of himself had always felt as if it was changing. He felt like he didn't blend in with other humans well anymore, as if he was out of place. At his core, however, he still stuck to the morals he'd held in his previous life. He shrugged. At the end of the day, it hardly mattered. His real form was a body that could be anything. Perhaps some part of him was still clinging to the idea of being a human. Perhaps one day he would return here, and his soul would no longer look human, but like something else. So many strange things had happened in this new, odd universe, he was no longer ready to discount anything. I have finished running my scan on the damage to your soul and physical form. Would you like to engage the repair process? Asra replied, her voice cool. Yes. How long will it take? Dorian queried. Estimating, incomplete data does not allow an accurate assessment, save for a reliable claim that less than a month is required, in real time. Asra responded. In real time? The end of what his soul spell matrix genie said caught his attention. Yes, in real time. Time within the nucleus of your soul spell matrix operates oddly. When the God King created your soul spell matrix, he drew upon the forces of creation itself, allowing you to bend reality and evolve. Because your consciousness is stored here, your perception of time passing will flow with the distortions present in your soul spell matrix. A real day could pass in a single hour here, or much longer. Okay, what does that mean, though? How long am I going to be stuck here? He looked around the endless white expanse, a hint of worry and irritation in his heart. It seemed like he might be forced to live in boredom for a few weeks or even a month. I am unable to provide a reliable estimate. The repair process will require the full engagement of my construct. I am unable to provide real-time estimates. Dorian paused at her words, frowning. All right. Well, you might as well get us started. The sooner we can get past this, the better. Acknowledged. Engaging the repair process. Asra's voice rang out, and then vanished. The world around Dorian flashed for just the briefest moment. And then everything returned to stillness. Asra? He was greeted with silence. The genie was fully engaged in repairing the damage to his soul, unable to respond or reply to him. Ah, all right, I guess I'm my own for a bit, huh? He shrugged. He looked around the endless white expanse, and then up at the glowing red orb that represented William. He nodded, and then looked around. Well, I might as well see what I can do here. Chapter 59. Waiting. Dorian raised his hands, looking at the endless white rock that stretched off into the distance. According to Asra, this world here was under his control. She didn't give him any specifics, but he had gained an innate understanding of what that meant. He looked closely at the stone floor in front of him and mentally willed the rock to pull up. Immediately, a small, 2-meter-tall pillar of stone rose into the air, about as wide as an arm's length. It shared the same plain white color as almost everything else. Ooh, Dorian muttered as he felt the strange movement. It felt like he was controlling a tendril of energy, and that by willing that energy to move, he was able to change the landscape around him. He grunted aloud as he waved his hands, causing 2 more pillars of stone to rise up. He grinned, and then looked out off to his left at the empty expanse. Rise, he yelled aloud, using the fullest extent of his will. Immediately, 1,000 stone pillars shot into the air, spaced evenly apart from each other. When they all rose in unison, a grating noise echoed in the air. Kinda cool. Dorian leapt up atop one of the pillars. Despite this just being his consciousness, he still maintained the same sense of balance and movement he would in a regular body. He jumped from pillar to pillar, practicing his movements. Gravity seemed to operate here like it did on the 2 planets and world bridge he traveled on, roughly at a level equivalent to Earth. He tried willing it to change, but failed. It seemed he didn't control everything here. Well, I guess I can practice running and dodging while I wait. He shrugged and stepped forward again, jumping from pillar to pillar. He might as well be productive with his time. Hey William. Dorian wiped a sheen of sweat from his forehead as he spoke, settling down on the ground next to the forest of stone pillars. He then looked at his hand askance. The sweat he'd wiped had vanished. His consciousness could get tired like his physical body, and he would feel all the same aches and the needs to rest. If he believed sweat would appear, it seemed it would actually appear here. It was quite odd. It's been 6 hours now. You're the only person here with me, so I figured I'd say hi. Dorian continued, looking up at the large, lightly glowing red orb up in the sky. I seem to have gained some sort of innate sense for time passing. I know exactly how long I've been here, down to the minute, even if I don't keep track. He rubbed his chin. I don't know if you can hear me up there, or if you ever will hear this. But thanks for saving my life. He nodded his head. I know my words right now might not mean much, but I'll try to do the same back. Hey William, we're on day 2 down here. I wish I could ask Asra how the repair process is going. It kinda sucks being left all alone down here. It must be hard for you up there. Dorian's voice was confident, full of cheer. He was currently standing on a small mountain of stone pillars, looking up at the red orb in the sky. After learning he could manipulate the landscape, Dorian had spent the entire next day practicing on creating stone creations from the ground. He'd so far willed a miles-wide forest of stone pillars to exist, as well as 3 large mountains, also made out of stone pillars. As he looked over them, he shook his head. He'd stuck to using stone pillars to see how it would look as an artistic statement. And it looked atrocious. Well, he never claimed to be much of an artist. He'd test out some other shapes later. Hup! He jumped into the air, landing on a nearby pillar as he began racing through them. Parkour. He jumped again, this time backflipping to a second pillar. Unfortunately, he slipped as he tried to latch on, his leg sliding. He tumbled and fell off the side of several other stone pillars before he forced himself to stop, hugging the side of one of the larger ones. OWW. He could still feel pain here, apparently. Or maybe he was only willing the pain to appear, because of his expectations. It was confusing. I think I'll try some stone spheres next, maybe practice my balance dancing on them. I'll check back in later. Hey William, it's been 7 pretty dull days now. I figure Asra must be getting close to finishing the repair process on my soul, which is exciting. For me and for you, after all. Dorian smiled as he looked up at William's dormant soul, relaxing on the smooth floor of the expanse. Off to his side, hundreds of random geometric shapes could be seen, various experiments of what he could and could not do. The white rock all looked uniform, but his myriad of designs had lived the place up a little. We're kinda similar in that regard now, aren't we? Me with my damaged soul, you with your damaged body. Well, destroyed, non-existent body. Okay, not the best metaphor, my bad. He sighed, running his hands through his hair. I think I'm going to take a nap. Every 12 to 16 hours, Dorian had discovered his consciousness needed to rest and rejuvenate, just as if he was in a regular body. The temperature here was placid, neither warm nor cold, and while the floor looked uncomfortable, it actually felt fine. Hey William, we just hit 1 month that I've been stuck down here. Exactly 30 days. Having each month last exactly 30 days in the 30,000 worlds is a pretty smart idea. Can you imagine how much of a pain it would be if the months ended randomly, like on the 28th or 31st? Dorian's voice was calm and collected as he sat, his legs crossed, looking down from the platform he was on. He'd begun practicing creating exact shapes by using his will. The sheer boredom of being stuck here, in this dull, unending world was starting to get to him. He couldn't do anything else here, no matter how he tried. In front of him were a set of tall, oak trees, standing roughly 8 to 9 meters each in height. Dorian looked at them proudly. They looked almost lifelike, very realistic to the eye. He stepped up to one of them, kicking off with his legs against it and jumping to another. His movements were quick and agile, his practice over the last month showing. I'm sure Asra will finish the repair process soon. I've been doing a lot of thinking lately, and I can't wait to get back to the outside world. Life down here is pretty monotonous. He sighed. I'll check back in later. Hey William, how are you? I'm doing okay. Dorian's voice sounded tired. It's been 3 months now. In front of Dorian, a small forest spread out. Not one of stone pillars, but actual, lifelike replicas of trees. Several hundred of them, giving the world a fairly realistic appearance, if one ignored color. A carved river moved through this small forest, realistic depictions of rocks, ruffling waves, and currents spreading along it. This is really hard, William. I hate not being able to talk to anyone or anything. I didn't realize how much I relied upon Asra, just to have another being to talk with. He continued speaking, his eyes distant. I'm okay though, don't you fret. I'll be getting you fixed up soon. I'm sure Asra is almost done. Hey Will. His voice was haggard, as he spoke, looking up at the glowing, never-changing red orb. I stopped counting the days. I think it's bad for my mental health. Around Dorian, a fully fledged forest stretched for miles. Realistic down to tiny details, the forest teemed with unmoving life. Carved depictions of squirrels and deer dotted the woods, alongside other small wildlife. In front of Dorian was a picture of a forest boar, a large, 2.5-meter tall creature that looked like a bull. A pair of firm white tusks stuck out of its brutish mouth, giving it an intimidating appearance. It was one of the creatures Dorian had encountered in the past, when he was trying to escape from Hosnorth. It's too bad the God King didn't create subsidized mental health care alongside my soul spell matrix. He muttered, rubbing his hands. I can't actually forget the time, Dorian sighed. It's been 6 months now, Will. 6 months. Dorian was quiet for a long moment. He sat down on the ground, turning around and leaning against the leg of the large, stone image of the forest boar. I won't lie to you, Will, he said, breathing in heavily. I'm scared. I've been here so long, I feel like I've started to forget what it's like to not be here. All I see here is unending white rock, in every direction, fading into that fog. I tried walking towards the fog, but I can never seem to reach it. I just move farther from where I started. He sighed, looking through the forest. Past the edge of the stone woods, a large collection of stone pillars could be seen. The ones he'd formed when he first got here, crude and large. Some shaped like mountains, others dotted randomly. I'm okay, though, Will. I'll tough it out. It's hard, it's really, really hard, but I'm not a quitter. He put on a smile as he looked up at the red orb, glowing up above. I'll check in later. He gave the orb a thumbs up. Dorian was silent as he gazed up at William's dormant soul, his eyes gleaming. Hi, Will. He spoke for the first time in several months. His voice sounded strange in his ears, echoing oddly. Today marks a year since Asra left to repair my soul. He spoke again, tasting the words as they left his mouth. He felt disconnected from them. The small forest he'd created had transformed into a massive one. Hundreds of creatures could be seen in it, some big while some large. From lesser throne demons and ifrits to red salamanders and brown treasure clams, a wide variety of every type of being Dorian had absorbed. I'm starting to lose faith, Will. His voice was a whisper. It's so hard, Will. Being here alone. I want to give up, Will. It's so hard. He was silent for a time. But if I give up, I might die. His eyes gleamed as he looked up at the red orb. I know you're depending on me. I won't give up. But it's really hard doing this alone. He took a deep, ragged breath. But I'm okay. He shook his head, putting on a smile. I'm okay. A large forest stretched for dozens of miles. Thousands of intricately carved stone creatures flocked within the forest, some in trees or small rivers, others hiding behind stones or near boulders. Next to this forest was a massive mountain range, filled with dozens of mountains. Some had precocious cliffs, while others long, sloping sides. Powerful beasts could be seen, standing frozen amidst the area, looking ferocious. A man could be seen, standing in front of one of these creatures. A powerful-looking creature that looked like a dinosaur, with thick, bulging legs and a mouth full of sharp teeth, standing a giant 10 meters tall. A Grandmaster-class green-scaled ground dragon. Dorian stared at the creature as he moved his finger, willing some of the stone to fall away, perfectly capturing the image of the beast. You were one of the first dangerous creatures I met. He smiled as he called up the memory of him hiding in fear as the giant dinosaur passed by. He really shouldn't be smiling at it, but going over any of his old memories made him smile now. He was confident that the him of now could easily trounce the beast, using his Ifrit form. He looked away from the huge predator, towards a much smaller carving. A small, four-legged creature with a collection of leaves shaped like a closed bud on its back. And this is a Bulbasaur. He jumped over towards the Pokémon. Use Vine Whip. He yelled out a command towards his creation, looking at it expectantly. It didn't move. He smiled ruefully. They never moved, or spoke, or did anything, unless he willed it. His smile faded as he looked away from the ferocious predator and the small Pokémon, both perched on the side of the mountain, and back up towards the ever-present red orb in the sky. He was silent for a few minutes. Those minutes then faded to a dozen, and from a dozen to an hour as he stared up at the red orb. It's been 5 years now, Will. Dorian's voice was quiet. He waited several more minutes before he continued. I wonder how much time has passed in the real world. Dorian turned away from the beast, looked up at the distant mountain peak. He hunched down and then exploded upward, his legs sending him flying with what should have been an impossible amount of force. His vast practice over the last several years had honed his will, and his control of his will. He'd realized that the only thing that limited him here was his imagination and willpower. If he wanted to be as strong as a god, then he would become as strong as a god. There were some things he couldn't change. The gravity, for one. For another, he was unable to add color to this world. He also couldn't go too high into the sky, no matter how or what he built. After about 2 miles, he slowly began to hit some type of mental barrier that he was unable to breach. Still, he thought, as he sailed high into the sky, landing atop the mountain peak. His experience in commanding his physical form, and using his will, had grown quite a bit. He didn't know if it would ever be useful if he made it back to the real world, but at least it was something. Dorian sat down on the peak, looking over the huge, widespread forest, and the mountains off behind him and to either side. He looked back up at the floating, still orb. I'm still here, Will. I'm still here. Dorian wondered, sometimes, on his darker days, why he hadn't gone insane. Perhaps his mind or soul had been strengthened in his new evolved forms, making him more resilient. Every day he stayed in here, simply staying sane became harder and harder. For some reason, though, he felt as if his consciousness was growing stronger with each passing day. This careful balance made him just barely able to handle everything. I don't know how, but I am. I am no hero. Just a few years ago I was a normal human. I don't know how much longer I'll be here. I don't know how much longer I can take this. He paused for a moment from his monologue, his fists clenching. But I will not give up. He closed his eyes. A single tear fell down his face, one that quickly vanished. I will never give up. After 8 years, 221 days, 13 hours, and 47 minutes in the distorted time of his soul spell matrix, an old, once familiar voice rang out in Dorian's head once more. Soul repair complete. Waking the host from dormancy. Chapter 60. Awakening. A gentle breeze rattling a pair of well-made wooden shutters, ever so lightly, woke Dorian up. He instantly came awake, stumbling to his feet as he looked around in panic. His mind became incredibly on edge, every muscle in his body tensing. Colors. He was surrounded by colors. His chest heaved as he looked around the furnished room, soaking in the sight of everything. A very faint rattling sound rang out again, drawing his attention to the closed window behind him. Pale gleams of moonlight could be seen, dropping down from one of the faint moons that orbited Taprisha in the chaotic space above. Is this a dream? He pushed his hands up into the air, waving them back and forth. They began to shake as they moved, his nervous excitement overwhelming him. Dorian looked at his hands. They were pitch black, with small claws on the end of each of them. The hands of an Ifrit. He knelt down, putting his trembling hands on the ground, feeling the texture of the rug that covered the wooden floor. The room he was in had a nice, quilted bed, one he had just been laying in. A small, dark orange rug decorated the floor. A pair of wooden nightstands stood on either side of the bed, with a couple of simple tapestries decorating the walls. A quaint, nice but simple room. It's soft, he thought, a smile slowly appearing on his face. He poked it a few times before running over to the window, throwing open the shutter. Cool, pale moonlight drifted into the room, revealing the crowded city of Podor. Dorian stared at everything, half afraid it would all vanish as he took in all the colors and sights. A cold breeze brushed against his skin, setting him shivering. Ecstasy, pure unbridled ecstasy ran through his veins. He closed his eyes for a moment and took a deep breath, barely able to control himself. I made it back, Will. Your soul has been fully repaired. Osra's voice rang out in his head. Osra. Dorian couldn't keep the smile off his face as he heard the voice, the first voice he had heard in so long. Ha 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 ha, you punk, it's good to see you again. Osra didn't reply. All of a sudden, a rush of memories flooded into Dorian's mind. A deluge that happened in an instant. From his coming to this world, to taking on his first form, to William dying to protect him, to meeting Mello, to stopping the 11th-born's fearsome attack, all of these memories swarmed his head. He experienced them almost as if he was reliving them, all in a single split second. He fell backwards onto the soft rug, clutching at his head. He accidentally stabbed his forehead slightly, forgetting he had claws in his Ifrit form. Faint sparks of fire flared up from his arms and legs. The flames on his Ifrit form's head blazed silently and mysteriously. They didn't seem to actually burn anything, but were more present in a spiritual form. Your body is now undergoing a genetic repair process. Due to consistent treatment over the past week in real time, the process is vastly sped up. It will finish within 6 days. Switching forms will reset the repair process. Osra's voice rang out in his mind once again. Okay, hold on. Only a week has passed? Dorian stumbled back to his feet, blinking blearily. His head felt cluttered. He winced in pain. Gradually that pain faded away, the regenerative powers of his Ifrit form, and the life energy in its veins, coming to his aid. He took a deep breath, and then let it out slowly. He was back. He felt like tearing up, all of a sudden. The constant fear that had plagued his heart for the past several years faded away, replaced by such relief he couldn't even begin to describe it. Never again, he muttered, shaking his head vehemently. I am never doing that again. Osra, show me my status. Dorian, soul status, soul stage. Lord class. Health. Good, undergoing genetic repair. Energy. 880 He mentally glanced over his status. It was what he expected, from the memories of before. The only thing odd was the energy part of his status. It was abnormally low. As he looked at it, he paused. He looked at his body, and then sat down, crossing his legs. I still have my memories of the inner area of my soul spell matrix. He muttered, resting his elbow on his knee as he sank into thought. I lived in that place for several years. Alone. Well, Will was there. Kind of. He shrugged. But I made it back out. He continued. It was horrifying and horrible at the same time. Any regular person would have gone insane. He nodded. But I don't feel insane. He looked around the room, his eyes filled with a deep, inner fire. I feel confident and strong. As if I've grown more assured. Dorian couldn't quite explain the feeling. The past 8 years in that mental prison had been hellish for him, but had seemed to fly by like a dream. Instead of horribly traumatizing him like he would expect, he felt as if his soul had grown stronger, letting him deal with the horror and grow from it. The memories weighed down on him, but they did not paralyze him. "Asra, is there anything unusual about my soul?" he asked, abruptly. He'd gained a bit of a habit of talking to himself over the past several mental years. He'd almost forgotten Asra was back with him. "Fate twists around your soul. Repairing or reconnecting injured parts of your soul is the limit of my capabilities. I do not possess the power to scan it in depth." The reply he got was lackluster. "All right, whatever." She was exactly as he remembered. Helpful most the time, but at other times lacking. "Why is my energy so low?" He scanned his body, closing his eyes. At his core, he felt tired still, as if he needed more rest. "The genetic damage your body suffered is still being rectified. Until it does, you are unable to make a full recovery." Asra replied, concisely. He mentally pulled up his growth status, the once familiar thoughts coming naturally to him again. Ifrit. Growth stage. 4 quarters, Elder Ifrit. Growth progress 0/0. 0 still, huh? He noted, sighing. It wasn't unexpected. He began running over what to do, trying to get back into the groove of being in the outside world again. While you were unconscious, your body underwent consistent treatment. Thanks to this, the amount of time and energy needed to rectify the genetic damage was vastly reduced, but all energy points you may have gained from this were used up. Asra continued, "You can absorb energy and store it like you normally would, as of right now. No more energy is needed for the repair process." It seemed all he needed now was time to make a full recovery. Dorian took a look around the room. His thoughts went astray as he studied the texture of the quilt bed, looking at the myriad of colors. He studied it, following the wavering trails of linen. It was beautiful, in its own, simple way. Even with having his memories forcefully relived, and his soul strengthening, he still couldn't shake the effects his mental imprisonment had left him with, not fully. He sighed, however, focusing back on the present. "It seems those vampires saved me." He distinctly remembered the female vampire he'd saved rushing to catch him as he fell. They hadn't been ungrateful after all, and seemed to have helped rescue him. The constant treatment to heal his wounded body probably fell on their shoulders most likely. He looked outside at the sleeping city once more, and then turned back to his bed. His body was tired, but he couldn't make himself sleep right now. The sheer wonder of being back in his body, in a world of sound and color, was too much to resist. "I'm going to go out." He nodded his head as he fully opened the shutters. He reached up with his hands and pulled himself onto the side of the inn, his body moving agilely and quickly. He was on the top floor of a 3-story establishment. He leapt up to the roof in one smooth motion, taking care not to clip the sides of the inn. The cool night air ran flush against his skin. As an Ifrit, he was very sensitive to the temperature changes around him. Very small, dim flames were visible on his elbows, knees, and head, mostly dormant unless he was in combat. He took a deep breath, taking in the scene around him. He appeared to be in the middle of the city, in one of the nicer, but not fancy, inns. He looked around at the other homes, shops, and buildings closed up for the night, soaking in the sights. He teared up slightly at the sight, the wonderful shapes and colors a myriad that he hadn't seen in far too long. He wrinkled his nose, however, at the smell. Even here in one of the nicer parts of the city, there was a faintly distasteful scent. About what he'd expected in a city. "Hello." A voice broke into his concentration, causing him to spin around in panic. He hadn't detected or sensed anyone on the roof. It was a large, 30-meter-wide platform, mostly flat. A small form was huddled on one side of the roof, a figure that was now standing up, giving him a small nod. "It's great to see that you finally woke up." A feminine voice rang out as the female vampire Dorian had saved walked towards him, giving him a cautious wave. "Thank you for saving me last week. My name is Helena. Don't worry, Probus. We'll play it by ear, trust me. When have I ever let you down?" Trajan's voice projected supreme confidence as he fiddled with a ring on his hand, looking around nervously. The vampire wizard blinked his eyes as he focused, concentrating. He was currently in one of the waiting rooms in the austere Castle of Darkness, the headquarters of the Aurelius family. The room was ornate, decorated with black and gray tapestries and portraits of previous vampires in history. It had been a week since their clash with the anomaly they were targeting. Their expedition had been a preliminary one, and the possibility of failure had been something they accepted. The extent of their failure, however, was unprecedented. At least, it was to Trajan. A vampire warrior dressed in form-fitting black armor sat on a couch near the wizard. The powerful swordmaster Probus. I seem to recall someone being in charge of stopping a certain giant fireball and failing, no? Probus returned, not deigning to glance at the wizard. That was hardly my fault. The anomalies twist fate around them, and if anything, you should have expected that. So really it's your fault. Trajan returned, shamelessly. Thankfully I was prepared, with my emergency countermeasures. Probus looked at Trajan askance. You didn't even know the demon race had surviving members. How can that demon possibility count as a countermeasure? Trajan smiled and held his hands in front of him, snapping his fingers twice and then slowly letting them fall. Magic. Probus rolled his eyes and snorted. I trust you about as far as I can throw you. Trajan smiled wider, replying. That would imply a considerable amount of trust. I'm a lightweight, after all. You see this physique? That's what you get if you eat environmentally friendly. He motioned at his lean figure, turning from side to model. Probus rolled his eyes again. We are not having this talk, Agai. The High Lord will see you now. A voice interjected, breaking into the conversation. Probus and Trajan stopped talking, turning to look at one of the doors that led to the waiting room. The beautiful red-headed assistant and spymaster to the High Lord stood in the doorway, giving them a cool smile, and then gestured for them to follow her. Trajan gulped and walked along with Probus into the room, ready to report to the High Lord.